Chapter 1. The proposal she couldn't say yes to. The ring was beautiful. Classic. Gold band. Modest but elegant. A single diamond, just large enough to shimmer under the restaurant lights. It was exactly what she'd always imagined, in theory. But as it glinted up at her from the velvet box, Riley Carter's stomach twisted. Across the table, Marcus grinned. He was confident, clean-shaven, polished, the kind of man who didn't believe in failure. Especially not in public. Especially not when he'd reserved a window table at Magnolia's, her favorite restaurant, and invited both families to drop by later for dessert. His voice was low, steady, rehearsed. "Riley, we've been together 4 years. We've built a future. It's time to make it official. Will you marry me?" The restaurant buzzed around them, oblivious to the hurricane rising in her chest. She should say yes. Marcus was the man everyone said she was lucky to have. He had a stable job in finance. Volunteered with church youth on the weekends. Always opened her car door. He remembered birthdays, and once flew home from a conference just to help her paint her apartment. But none of that was what made her hesitate. It was the hollow, the quiet, gnawing space in her spirit that had grown louder over the last year. That whisper that said, "This isn't it." She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe love was about steady hands and good intentions. But something deeper, older, rooted in faith in the voice of God, had begun to stir in her soul. And right now, that voice wasn't saying yes. It was saying wait. She looked up at Marcus. His eyes were bright, hopeful, and for the first time, she didn't smile back. "Marcus." His grin faltered. "What's wrong?" I can't." The word cut like winter wind. His face changed, sharp edges replacing softness. "Can't what?" "I can't marry you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The silence between them roared. The ride home was quiet. He dropped her off without saying more than a stiff, "Take care of yourself." Her parents called that night, confused, upset, asking if she'd lost her mind. But Riley didn't have the energy to explain it. How do you explain something that didn't feel logical? She couldn't point to a red flag. Marcus had never cheated. He wasn't abusive or neglectful. There was no big betrayal. There was just a still, small voice. One she'd ignored for too long. That night, she sat on her couch with her Bible in her lap, still unopened. She hadn't read it in weeks. Not really. Not past the occasional verse on a coffee mug or a social media post. She'd been drifting, distracted, caught up in the checklist life. She opened to Psalms. Not on purpose, it just fell open. "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." Tears slipped down her cheek. She had been building, working, pushing, planning, but none of it felt like peace. She whispered into the dark, "God, what am I doing?" No booming answer, just quiet. And somehow, that quiet felt like presence. The next morning, she woke up raw. Not in pain, exactly, but stripped. Tender. As if something had been removed that wasn't supposed to stay. She called in sick to work. Pulled on jeans and a hoodie. Drove through the sleepy outskirts of town to a small chapel she hadn't visited in years. The kind with wooden pews and stained glass windows that threw morning light like stories across the floor. She walked inside. Empty. Perfect. She sat in the back row, wrapped in silence, and began to cry. Not loud, not dramatic. Just tears, slow and steady, like years of pretending finally needed to exit her body. She didn't pray out loud. She didn't know what to say, so she sat. Until suddenly, she wasn't alone. A man, late 20s maybe, walked in and didn't see her. He took a seat on the far side of the sanctuary, head bowed, hands clasped tight. And then he prayed. Not in churchy language. Not in spiritual performance. Just broken words. "I don't know what you want from me. I'm trying. I'm trying, God. But if you're asking me to keep showing up to a life that doesn't feel like living, I need to hear you. I need to know you still see me." Riley froze. Something in her soul recognized that voice. Not his, but the voice behind it. That ache, that honesty, that holy desperation. He stayed there, unmoving, for almost 15 minutes. Then he stood, quietly left. Never saw her. But she saw him. And somehow, something inside her heart breathed again. She walked out into the morning sunlight not with answers, but with clarity. She didn't know where she was going yet. But she knew what she wasn't doing anymore. Settling. Chapter 2. The Church Bench and the Stranger's Prayer. Riley didn't sleep that night. She wasn't tossing and turning over Marcus, or the backlash, or what her friends would say when they found out she'd walked away from a perfectly good relationship. No, what kept her awake was the sound of that stranger's voice. The prayer wasn't loud. It wasn't poetic, but it hit something inside her chest like a tuning fork, vibrating against every buried ache she'd stuffed down over the years. The rawness, the honesty, the need. That man didn't pray for a job, or a relationship, or success. He prayed to be seen, and it wrecked her, because somewhere deep down, that's what she'd been begging God for, too, without realizing it. Not blessings, not approval, just to be seen. The next morning, Riley returned to the chapel. Same time, same hoodie, same corner pew. She sat for 30 minutes, alone. No stranger, no prayer, just silence. But it was enough. She came again the next day, and the day after that. She didn't pray elaborate prayers. Mostly she sat, sometimes whispered, sometimes wept. She began journaling. Nothing fancy, just thoughts, questions, single sentences. God, did I miss you when I said yes to Marcus the first time? How do I trust again? Not people, but myself? Am I even worthy of a God-written story? She kept returning. It became her secret sanctuary. And by the fourth day, he returned too. The stranger. Same hoodie as before. Same worn boots. Same silent presence that didn't try to impress anyone, not even God. He didn't sit near her. He didn't seem to notice her. But she noticed him. Not in a romantic way. Not yet. But in the way you notice something that reminds you you're not alone in your questions. On day 6, he arrived late. Riley was already leaving, Bible in hand, when he stepped through the chapel door, startled to find someone so close. Their eyes met, only for a second, but long enough for him to nod politely and step aside. She returned the nod, said nothing, but when she walked past him, she whispered, "Your prayer the other day. It meant something." He paused, turned slightly. "You were there?" She nodded. He looked down, a little embarrassed, but then exhaled softly. "Didn't know anyone heard me." "I think," she said, "that's why it mattered." He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. But for the first time, Riley walked out of that church feeling like God was building something in silence, and she didn't need to rush it. That weekend, she packed up Marcus's old things. The sweatshirt he left in her closet, the journal they bought together, the framed photo of their 3rd anniversary, the one everyone said made them look like they belonged in a magazine. She placed it all in a box, not because she was angry, but because she was freeing space. She didn't know what for yet, but she was learning that when God clears something out, it's never just to leave us empty. It's to make room for something more aligned, more holy, more healing. Her best friend Maya came over the next day, eyes wide. "You serious about this?" Maya asked, pointing at the box. "You really called it off?" Riley nodded. "I had to." Maya sat down, sighing. "Girl, he's gonna act like you ruined his whole life. Just so you know." "I didn't ruin anything," Riley said softly. "I just stopped pretending peace was present when it wasn't." Maya looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "Dang, that's a word." That night, Riley journaled again. Maybe peace isn't loud. Maybe peace is knowing you're not walking in circles anymore. Maybe peace is watching the wrong door close without needing to knock again. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew who was in control now. And that was enough for today. Chapter 3, When Familiar Feels Foreign. The strangest part of change isn't what leaves. It's how everything that stays begins to look different. Riley returned to work the following Monday. Same office, same cubicle, same stale coffee in the break room. But it all felt off. Her manager, Melissa, was still loud and overly cheerful. Her coworkers still gossiped between emails and treated their job like a survival sport. Nothing had changed, except Riley. She stared at her computer screen, typing numbers into an invoice system she barely understood, and suddenly felt the weight of it all. This wasn't her life. Not anymore. It was a life she'd settled into when she believed stability mattered more than purpose. A job she took because it paid decently and offered health insurance. But no part of it sparked. No part of it aligned with the quiet voice God had been awakening in her. That voice had gotten louder lately. It didn't scream or demand. It just whispered, "There's more." At lunch, she took her sandwich to the rooftop patio and called her mom, the one person she hadn't really spoken to since the broken engagement. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Riley." "Hi, Mom." A pause. "Sweetheart, I've been worried. Are you all right?" Riley hesitated. "Honestly, I think I'm better than I've been in a long time. Her mom exhaled. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, we were shocked. Marcus said he didn't understand. I didn't either, Riley admitted. Not at first. But now I think I do. Well, her mom said carefully, you've always been strong. But maybe this time, you're also being wise. The words landed softly. Thanks, Mom. That afternoon, she got an unexpected email. Subject, position available, Assistant Director, Haven House. She almost deleted it. Spam, probably. But something told her to open it. The message read, Hi Riley. Your name came across my desk this morning through a mutual friend. We're looking for someone with strong administrative experience and a heart for ministry to serve as Assistant Director of Haven House, a residential support center for single women and mothers in transition. Small town, slower pace, big purpose. Thought of you. If you're even remotely curious, let's talk. Pastor Dan Rivers. She blinked. Haven House. She vaguely remembered hearing about it during a church fundraiser 2 years ago. It was in Willow Ridge, a rural town 2 hours away. Not exactly the epicenter of career ambition. But as she read the email again, her heart beat faster. Small town, slower pace, big purpose. What if this wasn't random? What if this was the answer to her whispered prayers, the ones she barely knew how to pray? That evening, Riley found herself back at the chapel. The stranger wasn't there. She sat in her pew, pulled out her journal, and wrote the question that had been brewing in her heart since the moment she saw that job listing. Am I brave enough to say yes to something I didn't plan? The next morning, she replied to Pastor Dan's email. I'm curious. Tell me more. Within 2 hours, they were on a call. Pastor Dan was warm, funny, grounded. He spoke with conviction, but listened well. He told her about the residents of Haven House, how some came from abusive marriages, others from addiction, others just from hard seasons. He said the team wasn't flashy, but deeply committed. Then he said something that stunned her. I don't know why your name came to mind, Riley. But when it did, I couldn't shake it. So I prayed, and felt peace. She pressed the phone to her ear, silent. He continued, I don't need you to be perfect, just willing. If God's stirring something, don't ignore it. That night, she drove aimlessly through her neighborhood, past the grocery store where she and Marcus used to shop, past the coffee shop where she cried after the breakup, past the apartment she'd once decorated for a future that no longer made sense. Everything was familiar, but none of it felt like home anymore. And in her spirit, she sensed the invitation. It's okay to outgrow what once held you. The next morning, she called Pastor Dan back. I don't have all the answers, she said, but I think God's asking me to take the next step. So, I'm in. She gave her notice at work. Her manager was shocked. Her coworkers confused. But Riley felt light, unburdened, the kind of peace that only comes when obedience outweighs logic. She packed her apartment over the weekend, donated what she didn't need, cried over old memories, laughed at forgotten trinkets. And on Sunday afternoon, she filled her car with boxes and drove toward Willow Ridge, toward a new chapter she didn't write, but one God was clearly authoring. As she crossed into town, her GPS said, turn left on Chapel Road. She did. And there, just past a row of maple trees turning golden for fall, stood Haven House, modest, white-paneled, surrounded by quiet fields and distant hills. And across the street was a small white chapel. She pulled into the driveway and noticed the house next door. A man was sitting on the porch steps, sketchbook in hand, hoodie pulled over his head. He looked up. It was him, the stranger. This time, their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. Chapter 4. The job offer that wasn't on her radar. Willow Ridge smelled like pine and fireplace smoke. It was early fall, and the trees were starting to turn, bright reds, sunburned oranges, the yellows of new beginnings. Riley parked in the gravel lot next to Haven House and stepped out, breathing deeply. For a moment, she just stood there. No honking traffic, no glowing screens, no pressure to perform or pretend. Just air and silence and the strange, sacred feeling of stepping into something not chosen but prepared. Pastor Dan greeted her with a wide grin and 2 coffees. You made it, he said. I did. Riley smiled, though her nerves hummed beneath her skin. He handed her one of the cups. Pumpkin spice. Thought you might be the type. She laughed. I'm exactly the type. They walked toward the main building. It wasn't large, maybe 6 bedrooms, a kitchen, a family room, and 2 small offices. But it was warm. Lived in. full of stories. The walls held children's drawings. The dining table had mismatched chairs. The bookshelf near the entrance overflowed with devotionals, parenting books, and a Bible that had clearly been read cover to cover. Riley's chest tightened, not from anxiety, from a quiet, unexplainable rightness. He showed her to her small office. Nothing fancy. A desk, a chair, a corkboard, and a window that looked out at the chapel across the street. She froze. The chapel, and next to it that house. His house. Who lives over there? She asked casually. Pastor Dan glanced out. Oh, that's Elijah's place. Elijah, she echoed. He's been around a while. Keeps to himself mostly. Helps with maintenance sometimes, and he paints. Doesn't say much. Lost someone a few years ago. Wife or fiancé, not sure. But he's kind. Faithful. He's been through a lot. Riley nodded slowly. Elijah. So he had a name now. And a story. And she was suddenly more curious than she'd expected to be. Later that evening, she walked to the chapel. It was nearly sunset, the sky's soft lavender, gold melting at the edges. She didn't go inside. She just stood by the front steps. Across the street, Elijah was sweeping his porch. He looked up. Their eyes met again. This time, she waved. He hesitated. Then, barely, lifted his hand in return. No smile. No words. But something passed between them. Not attraction, not invitation. Recognition. Two souls who had prayed in the dark and been answered in whispers. Her first week at Haven House was full. She met residents, women with complex pasts and hopeful eyes. She listened to stories about addiction, betrayal, single motherhood, recovery, faith. Some women were joyful, others guarded. Some greeted her with hugs. Others didn't speak. Riley didn't try to force connection. She just served. She organized donations, helped with budgeting workshops, took over meal planning and activity schedules. She even drove one resident, Kira, to her GED test, cheering when Kira passed with near-perfect scores. At the end of each day, she went home tired, but a good tired. The kind that came from purpose, not pressure. And every night, she journaled. I'm still not sure why you brought me here, God, but I'm starting to believe it wasn't just for them. On Friday, she was locking up the supply room when someone tapped her shoulder. It was Miss Brenda, the house cook and grandmother figure. You settling in, honey? Riley nodded. Slowly, but yes. Miss Brenda grinned. You're a godsend. We've prayed for someone like you for months. Riley blinked. Really? And between you and me, she leaned in. Elijah hasn't sat on that porch in weeks. Now he's out there every evening. Riley's cheeks flushed. Oh, I didn't. Miss Brenda chuckled. Relax, child. Ain't saying anything. Just noticing. That boy's been living in shadows too long. Riley looked down at her shoes. I don't know what he's looking for. Maybe he's not looking. Maybe he's just hoping. That night, she sat on her porch. Notebook in hand. Pen hovering. She wasn't writing letters like before. Now it was conversations. Between her and God. Tonight's entry read. You know what I almost settled for, Lord? Comfort. Applause. Predictability. I almost married a good man with a good plan. But not one designed by you. Now I'm here. I don't know if Elijah is part of this story or just a chapter. But I know I see something in his eyes that looks like home. Not the kind of home I can decorate. The kind you build in the quiet. With bricks made of healing. Across the street, Elijah sat on his steps. Sketchbook open. From this distance, she couldn't see what he was drawing. But he kept glancing up at the chapel. Then at her. Then back to the page. And in her spirit, Riley felt something shift. Not like falling, but like rooting. The slow beginning of a love story not fueled by sparks, but faith. Chapter 5. A house, a cross, and the quiet neighbor. Riley hadn't meant to become curious. Not like this. She told herself it was just coincidence. The chapel, the house next door, the porch at sunset. Just quiet routines lining up in a small town where people moved slower, where eyes met longer, where hearts didn't need to scream to be heard. But Elijah? Elijah had presence. Not because he spoke, he rarely did, but because even his silence had weight. On Sunday morning, Riley walked across the gravel road to the chapel for the first service she'd attended since arriving. She wore a navy dress and a cardigan, nothing fancy. Her Bible felt heavier in her hand than she remembered. Inside, the chapel was filled with sunlight and softness. Rows of wooden pews, worn hymnals, the smell of old wood, and something floral. Peace lived here. She slid into a pew near the back, alone. The music was acoustic, just a young woman with a guitar and an older man on piano. No stage lights. No production. Just worship. Just Jesus. When the message began, she leaned forward. Pastor Dan spoke on Abraham and Isaac, the moment when God asked for what was most precious. He paused midway and said, "Sometimes, the greatest test of faith isn't in letting go, it's in not rushing what God's promised. Can you wait, even when it's uncomfortable? Can you stay obedient, even when you're uncertain?" Riley closed her eyes. She thought of Marcus, of the ring, of the ease of a life already mapped out. And she thought of the chapel, of the whisper that had pulled her here. She wrote one sentence in her journal as the message ended. Obedience looks foolish until it becomes testimony. After church, she stepped out into the sunlight. Elijah stood across the street on his porch, coffee in hand. She hesitated, then crossed. This time, she didn't wait for him to look up. She just said, "You come to church?" He glanced at her, then nodded. "Sometimes. Not always the main service." "You believe?" she asked gently. He paused. "In God." "Yeah." She waited. He added, "Just working on trusting him again." Riley nodded slowly. "That makes two of us." They stood in the quiet. Then he motioned to the steps. "You can sit if you want." She did. They didn't talk about anything heavy. Mostly small things. The weather, her first week at Haven House, how quiet the town got after 8 p.m. But with every word, every moment, Riley felt something building. Not attraction. Not yet. But understanding. Connection that wasn't forced. Conversation that didn't circle around masks or performance. She noticed how Elijah listened. Really listened. He didn't rush to respond. Didn't fill silence with noise. And when he did speak, it was thoughtful, as if he'd weighed his words before releasing them. After about 20 minutes, he asked, "You journal a lot?" She blinked. "How'd you know?" "You had a notebook the other day. And the day before." "You saw that?" He nodded. "I guess it's how I sort things," she said. "And pray." He looked at the chapel. "I used to write to God." "Used to?" Elijah shrugged. "Stopped a while back. Thought maybe he'd stopped answering." Riley looked at him carefully. "You think he brought you back here for no reason?" He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "I think. He's still writing something. I'm just not sure I'm in the next chapter yet." She smiled. "Maybe you are. Maybe this is the next chapter." That evening, Riley baked banana bread, an old recipe from her grandmother. She wrapped half in foil and, without thinking twice, brought it across the road. When Elijah opened the door, he raised an eyebrow. "Is this a bribe?" She grinned. "A peace offering." He accepted it with a rare smirk. "I don't even remember being at war." "Well, consider it a thank you then." "For what?" "For reminding me that faith doesn't always have to be loud to be real." He nodded, eyes soft. "I'll take that." She walked home under a sky painted in streaks of orange and rose. Later, in her journal, she wrote, "Today I sat on the porch of a man I barely know, but felt seen. Not because he complimented me or tried to impress me, but because he let silence be sacred. God, is this what healing feels like?" At Haven House, the week brought challenges. One of the residents, Tamika, left unexpectedly, a note on her pillow, "No goodbye." Riley felt it like a loss. She hadn't even realized how attached she'd grown to these women. To their pain, their laughter, their strength. She sat in the kitchen long after dinner that night, watching the ceiling fan spin. Miss Brenda came in, poured 2 mugs of tea, and sat down. "Hurts, huh?" she asked. Riley nodded. "I thought she was turning a corner." "She might be," Brenda said gently. "But sometimes people turn corners in private before they show you." Riley looked at her. "You really think she'll come back?" Brenda smiled. "Child, I don't put nothing past Grace. That girl's got God's fingerprints all over her." Later that night, Riley sat outside her house, hoodie pulled over her head, notebook in lap. She didn't write much. Just one line. Maybe Grace is knowing some chapters aren't finished just because the character walked off the page. Across the road, Elijah's porch light was off. But in the darkness, she knew he was there. Somehow, she could feel it. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like home. Chapter 6. His story is the one she overheard. Wednesday afternoons at Haven House were quiet. Most of the women were out, some at job interviews, others at appointments, a few just walking around town to feel like people again instead of projects. Riley stayed behind that day, sorting through a shipment of donated books and folding laundry in the communal living room. She didn't mind the stillness. The house hummed with echoes of lives being rebuilt, and she found peace in the ordinary. Towels, paperbacks, gentle music from the kitchen radio. That's when she heard voices drifting in from the open window. Outside, across the street, on Elijah's porch. She paused, a shirt half folded in her hands. It wasn't just him. There was another man, older, louder, his voice sharp around the edges. I'm telling you, son, this can't be your life. You're hiding. You think painting and keeping your head down is healing? It's cowardice. You think God's proud of that. Elijah's voice came, low and even. I never said I was proud. You need to start over, not stand still. I am starting over, Elijah replied. It just doesn't look the way you want it to. There was a pause. You're wasting your potential, the man said bitterly. No, Elijah said softly. I wasted it before. When I pretended I wasn't broken. The older man didn't reply. A few seconds later, Riley heard footsteps, then a truck door slam. The engine started, and the truck pulled away. She stood by the window, her heart heavy. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. But now she knew something. Elijah wasn't just quiet. He wasn't just private. He was recovering. And not from a breakup or a bad decision, but from something deeper. Something that made even his own father lose patience. That evening, she saw him sitting on the porch again, sketchbook in hand, head bowed. She crossed the street. This time, he looked up first. Hey, he said. Hey. She sat beside him without asking. He didn't hide the sketch. It was a pencil drawing of the chapel. I heard your dad, she said gently. He exhaled. Of course you did. I didn't mean to listen. I was folding towels. He smirked a little. Exciting life you've got over there. They sat in silence. Then Riley said, I don't think starting over has a blueprint. I think it's different for everyone. Elijah nodded, slow and heavy. He wants me to go back. Get my license reinstated. Apply for new contracts. Jump back into engineering. And you don't want that? I used to, he said. But it's like, I got everything I thought I wanted, and it still broke me. She waited. He went on. I was engaged. 3 years ago. Her name was Lila. We were building a home, planning a future. I was working 80 hours a week trying to secure everything. One day, she called me from the hospital. She'd collapsed at work. Cancer, they said. Advanced. Aggressive. Riley's chest ached. She was gone 6 weeks later. Elijah said quietly. I never forgave myself for missing so many dinners. So many moments. I showed up for her funeral in a suit I hadn't dry cleaned in months. She told me, a few days before she died, that I didn't know how to be present. That I only loved the life I was building, not the one I was living. He swallowed hard. And she was right. Riley didn't speak. She didn't offer a Bible verse or a silver lining. She just placed her hand gently over his and let the silence do what words couldn't. After a while, Elijah whispered, I started coming to that chapel after she died. Just to sit. I didn't pray at first. I just sat. Then one day, I saw you there. She looked up. You saw me? He nodded. You were crying. But not like it was the first time. Like it was finally safe. She looked down, blinking fast. You helped me remember something, he said. What's that? That God doesn't just speak in healing. Sometimes he speaks in ache. And sometimes, the ache is what wakes us up. That night, Riley returned home and wrote in her journal. He's not a fixer-upper. He's not a project. He's a person with pain and purpose and a past that doesn't scare me. Maybe love doesn't start with chemistry. Maybe it starts with confession. And maybe the bravest thing we can ever say is, I'm not okay, but I'm still here. At Haven House the next day, she sat with the residents in the living room and read aloud from a devotional. Kira asked if she believed in second chances. Riley smiled. I believe in third and fourth and 50th chances. Because God's story doesn't end with the mess. It ends with mercy. One of the new girls, barely 20, whispered, So you really think people like us can be loved again? Riley looked her in the eye. I don't just think it, she said. I know it. Across town, Elijah stood in front of a blank canvas in his studio, a converted garage with cracked cement and streaks of sunlight through the slats. He dipped his brush into charcoal gray and began painting what he hadn't touched in over a year. A woman with tears in her eyes. Not sad, not broken, just honest. Seen. And in the background, just behind her shoulder, a small chapel stood, open door, golden light. Chapter 7. A visitor from the past. Thursday morning brought an unexpected knock at Riley's door. She was sipping coffee in her robe, Bible open on her lap, still reflecting on the pages of her journal from the night before. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door slowly and froze. Marcus stood on her front step, clean-shaven, slacks and buttoned down. The same polished confidence that had once swept her off her feet, but now looked like a costume he forgot to take off. "Riley," he said, hands in his pockets. "You look good." She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" He glanced around, clearly uncomfortable. I heard through mutual friends that you left the city, that you were working at some group home. I didn't believe it until I asked your mom." Riley folded her arms. "And she told you where to find me?" "No, but she did not tell me either." She sighed. "So you drove 2 hours to what?" "Talk me back into our engagement." He didn't answer right away. "Then, I just needed to see if you were okay." "I am." He looked away. "I thought you might have had some kind of breakdown. Everyone said you changed overnight. Gave up your career, walked away from everything." Riley tilted her head. "Everything who wanted?" He blinked. She added, "You keep saying I gave up my life. But maybe I finally started living mine." Marcus sat on the porch steps without being invited. Riley stayed standing. He looked up at her, softer now. "Look, I know I wasn't perfect, but I tried to be everything you needed." "No," she said. "You tried to be everything you thought looked good on paper. And I played along because I didn't know who I was without the picture-perfect frame." He nodded slowly, wounded. "I'm not angry," she added. "But I don't belong in that life anymore." "Is there someone else?" he asked. Riley hesitated. "No, but there's something else. Purpose. Peace. Faith I didn't know I needed." He rubbed his jaw. "You were always the good one." "I wasn't," she said. "I was just really good at pretending." He stood. "So that's it." She looked at him. Really looked. At the man who once made her believe love was something to earn. The man who made her feel guilty for needing more than career goals and scheduled romance. And she said, "Yes, that's it." He nodded, slowly, defeated, and left. Elijah saw him. He hadn't meant to watch, but from his porch, it was hard not to notice a stranger pacing on Riley's steps, looking like a man unraveling. When Riley returned across the street, she didn't wave. She just walked past him, straight into the chapel. Alone. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. He stood up, walked over, and stepped into the chapel for the first time in months. She was seated on the back pew, tears running down her face. She didn't flinch when he sat beside her. He offered no words, just slid a folded handkerchief into her palm. She smiled through the tears. "Thank you." They didn't speak again until later that night. He brought 2 mugs of cocoa to her porch. She took one. "Marcus came," she said. "I saw. He thought I lost myself. And..." She looked at the stars. "I think I'm finally found." After a long pause, Elijah said, "I painted something today." She looked at him, intrigued. "You want to see it?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They crossed the street in quiet steps. Inside the studio, the canvas stood in the corner. Her breath caught. It was her. Not a perfect replica, but the way he painted her eyes, her posture, the slight tremble in her hands. She saw herself, not polished, but real, whole. "How?" she whispered. He stepped beside her. "I painted you the way I first saw you. Not the first time at the chapel. The real first time." She turned. He looked down, almost shy. "A year ago, I came to speak at Haven House about my recovery. I saw you in the back, helping one of the kids. You were smiling, but your eyes looked empty." She blinked. "You saw me?" "Yeah," he said. "And I remember thinking, she's carrying something heavy, but she's still showing up." I never forgot that. Riley covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "And then," he added, "you disappeared. Months passed. But when I saw you again in the chapel, I knew. You weren't just visiting. God was rewriting something." That night, Riley wrote in her journal, "Sometimes, what feels like the end is actually God whispering, 'Start here.' And sometimes, the people who see your soul before your smile are the ones he sends to help you rebuild." Chapter 8. When Purpose and Person Align. The following week felt like spring, even though fall clung to the trees. Everything was lighter. It wasn't that problems disappeared. Haven House still needed repairs. The budget was always tight, and one of the newer residents had a meltdown during group therapy and nearly left. But something had shifted in Riley. She wasn't holding her breath anymore. She was breathing. On purpose. With purpose. Each morning, she rose early and spent time in the chapel before the sun crested the ridge. Just her, her Bible, and the quiet thrum of gratitude humming in her chest. She wasn't praying for answers anymore. She was praying for alignment. God, let my feet walk where you lead. Let my hands touch what you've assigned to me. And if love is written into this story, let it be you who pens every line. Elijah started showing up more, not just on the porch, but at Haven House. He offered to repaint the girls' bedrooms, something warm, inviting, soft. He brought in canvases and taught the residents how to express their emotions through art, color, texture. The women loved him, especially little Madison, the 4-year-old whose mother, Alina, had escaped an abusive home and barely spoke. One afternoon, Madison climbed into Elijah's lap mid-session and fell asleep with streaks of yellow and purple paint on her cheeks. Elijah didn't move for an hour. Riley watched from the doorway, something tender rising in her chest. Not romantic butterflies, but reverence. Oh, the kind that comes when you realize someone's gentleness isn't a performance, but a practiced compassion that's been carved out through pain. Later, as they cleaned up, Riley smiled and said, "You're really good with them." Elijah shrugged. "They're honest. I think honesty recognizes honesty." She nodded. "They trust you." He looked at her then. Really looked. "Do you?" The question wasn't flirty or heavy-handed. It was sincere. Riley didn't flinch. "I do." That night, they sat on the chapel steps as the moon rose. No sketchbooks. No coffee. Just stillness. After a long silence, Elijah said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What if your purpose isn't a place or a role or a project?" he asked quietly. "What if it's a person you're becoming?" Riley breathed deep. "Then I think, for the first time, I actually love who I'm becoming." He turned toward her. "I do too." The next morning, Pastor Dan called Riley into his office. "I need to step away for a few months," he said, setting down a folder. "Family situation. My sister's health is failing and she's in Colorado. But I can't leave this place in chaos." Riley sat up straighter. "Okay, I want you to lead while I'm gone." She blinked. "Me? You've been doing it already. The women trust you. The communities responded to your presence. You have vision, Riley. Not ambition. Vision. There's a difference." She felt her heart race. "I'm not qualified." He smiled. Neither were any of the disciples. She let out a shaky breath. "What about Brenda?" "She agrees. Said you've got an old soul and a new fire." Her words. Riley laughed, then stilled. "I need to pray about it. I'd be disappointed if you didn't." That night, she told Elijah. He didn't look surprised. "You were built for this," he said simply. "But what if I mess up?" He shrugged. "You will." She laughed. "That's encouraging." "It is," he said, eyes kind. "Because your story doesn't depend on your perfection. It depends on your obedience." Riley stared at him, that old ache in her chest replaced by a holy stillness. She whispered, "You speak like someone who's forgiven himself." He looked down. "Some days I do. Some days I just remember that God already has." By Friday, she gave her answer. She'd lead, not because she was ready, but because she trusted the one who was calling. In the weeks that followed, Haven House blossomed. They started new programs, art therapy for kids, financial literacy classes, a morning devotional circle that filled up faster than expected. Riley wasn't perfect, but she was present, and the women responded. They laughed louder, cried freer, prayed together. Even Kira, who had once called herself too damaged, led a devotion one Tuesday and ended with, "God didn't wait for me to get cleaned up. He walked with me through the dirt." Afterward, Riley pulled her into a hug and whispered, "That was the gospel in one sentence." One Sunday, Elijah walked her home after the evening service. The wind carried leaves across their path. His hand brushed hers once, twice, then stayed. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But that night, she journaled. Maybe alignment feels like stillness beside someone who isn't trying to change you. Just see you. Walk with you. Chapter 9. The night she almost left. It started with a phone call. Riley was halfway through planning next month's shelter calendar when her cell rang. It was her mother. They hadn't spoken much since Riley left the city. Not out of anger, more like awkward confusion. Her mother didn't understand why she'd walked away from everything that once defined her. The job, the condo, the man. "Hey, Mom," Riley answered, bracing. Her mother's voice was unusually clipped. "Are you still playing house with those women in that charity place?" Riley winced. "It's not a game. Haven House is." "I know what it is, Riley. And I know what it's not. It's not a future. It's not stability. And it's definitely not what we raised you for. I wasn't aware I was on loan to a dream you scripted." Her mother huffed. "This isn't you. This is guilt. You're punishing yourself for saying no to Marcus, for leaving your job. But this isn't healing. It's hiding." "I'm not hiding," Riley said, quieter now. "I'm becoming." A long pause. Then, "Your father and I want you to come home. Just for a few weeks. Reset. Think about what you're doing." Riley closed her eyes. She could hear the subtext. Think about what you're ruining. Think about who you're disappointing. That night, Riley didn't sleep. She sat on her porch under the weight of everything unsaid. What if they were right? What if she was hiding? What if Haven House was just a Band-Aid over a gaping hole of confusion? She pulled out her journal and stared at the blank page. Nothing came. For the first time in weeks, her pen hesitated. And she wondered if this whole story she was trying to live had just been emotional rebellion. The next day, she packed a small overnight bag. Just in case. Just to feel what it might be like to leave. To go back to the city. To the curated safety of a life she once pretended fit. She set the bag by the door. Didn't touch it. Just looked at it. By afternoon, the storm rolled in. Not metaphorical, but literal. Thunder shook the sky. Rain pelted the roof. The kind of storm that made people cancel plans and stay inside with warm drinks and blankets. But not today. Today, one of the girls at Haven House, Sophia, 16, stubborn, ran. No one knew why. Only that she left during chores, didn't answer her phone, and was last seen near the bridge on the edge of town. Riley grabbed her keys and ran into the rain. She found her after 40 frantic minutes, soaked to the bone, sitting under a willow tree by the creek, knees pulled to her chest. Riley didn't shout. She didn't demand. She just sat down beside her in the mud. Soaked too. Shivering. Present. After a while, Sophia spoke. "I thought maybe if I disappeared, no one would notice." Riley whispered, "I noticed." Silence. Then Riley added, "But even if I hadn't, God would have." Sophia started to cry, the kind of crying that sounded more like relief than sadness. Riley wrapped an arm around her. They sat like that until the thunder softened. Back at Haven House, after everyone was safe and dry and asleep, Elijah came to the porch. He didn't ask questions, just handed her a fresh cup of tea and leaned against the post beside her. After a long silence, he said, "You packed a bag." She looked at him, startled. He nodded toward the door. "I saw it earlier. It's not a crime to consider leaving." She looked down. "Sometimes I still wonder if I'm just pretending." "You're not. I don't know what I'm doing half the time." "That's faith." He turned toward her then, fully. "Riley, the woman I've watched the past few months? She's not running. She's rising. You're not pretending. You're becoming." Tears sprang to her eyes. She whispered, "Why does it still hurt so much?" "Because becoming always requires breaking," he said. "But breaking isn't the end. It's the beginning of rebuilding." That night, she didn't touch the bag. In the morning, she unpacked it, slowly, deliberately, and put everything back where it belonged. Then she opened her journal and wrote, "I almost left last night. But then a girl who thought she didn't matter reminded me why I'm still here. I don't need certainty. I just need obedience. I don't need a map. I just need to stay close to the one holding the compass. I'm not going back. I'm going forward, even if the next step is still invisible." Chapter 10. The day he called her home. The week after the storm settled into a calm so still, it felt sacred. The kind of peace that didn't make sense on the outside. Laundry still piled high. Funding proposals were still pending, and one of the residents had just learned her ex was trying to sue for custody. But somehow, in the middle of the chaos, Riley felt more anchored than she had in her entire life. Not because anything outside of her changed, but because something inside had finally settled. She wasn't searching anymore. She was dwelling. On Friday, Elijah invited her to his studio. It had been weeks since she last stepped inside. This time, it looked different, brighter, organized, as if it too had begun to heal along with its artist. "I want to show you something," he said, guiding her to a covered canvas at the back. He pulled the cloth away, and Riley gasped. It was Haven House, but more than that. It was her. She stood at the center, surrounded by women and children, some laughing, some crying, some praying, but all of them looking toward her. Not idolizing, trusting. And above her head, faint but unmistakable, a soft golden light broke through clouds, casting down in the shape of a cross. Her eyes blurred with tears. "Elijah, this is true," he said quietly. "It's what I see." She looked at him, unable to speak. "I used to think home was a place," he said. "Four walls, familiar routines, quiet streets." She nodded, still overwhelmed. "But I was wrong," he continued. "Home is where God meets you in your pain, and where someone sees your soul and chooses to stay." He stepped closer. "I look at you, Riley, and I see home." Riley didn't cry like she expected to. She didn't flinch. She simply reached out and held his hand. Not as a romantic gesture. Not yet. But as a holy one. A recognition. A reverence. That night, the chapel filled with more people than usual. It wasn't Sunday, but Brenda had suggested a gratitude gathering. No preaching, no formality. Just testimonies, music, and stories of how God had moved in small, quiet, faithful ways. Kira spoke first. Then Ms. Rosa, the oldest resident. Then, unexpectedly, Elijah. He stood in front of the room, hands tucked into his back pockets, and cleared his throat. "I used to think silence meant God had left me," he said. "That because I couldn't feel him, he wasn't near. But what I've learned here, from this chapel, from Haven House, from her," he glanced at Riley, "is that sometimes God whispers in the quiet because he's closer than ever. And if you listen close enough, you realize he never left at all." The room held its breath. Riley did too. Afterward, they walked home together, not saying much, but knowing everything that needed to be said had already been spoken through looks, through presence, through surrender. At her porch, she turned to him. "You know," she said with a soft smile, "I never wanted to stay here. It was just supposed to be a break. A breather before I figured out my real life." He grinned. "I'm glad the detour became the destination." She looked up at the stars. "Me too." Then she added, barely above a whisper, "You make it easier to believe I'm right where I belong." He took her hand again. "I don't know what the future holds," he said. "But if you're in it, even just as a friend, a neighbor, a co-laborer, then I know it's a future worth stepping into." She nodded. Tears welled in her eyes again, but not the aching kind, the healing kind. In her journal that night, she wrote, "There's something sacred about being seen when you're not performing. About being chosen when you're not chasing. About being called home, not because you're perfect, but because you're faithful. This isn't the life I planned, but maybe it's the life God wrote with his own pen." Chapter 11. When the past comes knocking again. It was Saturday when the letter came. Not an email, not a text, an actual envelope, addressed in familiar handwriting Riley hadn't seen in over a year. Her father. She sat on the porch steps, sunlight warming her shoulders, the unopened envelope resting in her lap like a ticking clock. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she opened it anyway. "Riley, I don't know how to say this without sounding like the father who always expected you to follow a script I wrote. But maybe I was that father. You were always so good at making us proud. Grades, jobs, relationships. I thought that meant we raised you right. But it wasn't until you walked away from all of it that I realized. Maybe we only raised you to perform, not to become. Your mother and I have been watching from a distance. Brenda sends updates. Quietly, respectfully. She told us what you're building at Haven House. What you've chosen instead of the life we had planned for you. At first, I was angry. Now, I'm humbled. Because for the first time, I see you. Not as the daughter I wanted, but as the woman God called. Come visit if you can. No expectations. Just an open door. And Riley, we're proud of the woman you are becoming. Love. Dad." Tears blurred her vision. Not sad ones. Not bitter. Just soft. The kind that comes when the walls finally fall, and you feel safe enough to let healing finish what pain started. That evening, Riley sat on the chapel floor, letter folded beside her. Elijah came in quietly, pausing in the doorway. "I brought paint," he said with a half smile. "For the guest room wall you said needed cheering up." She smiled. "I think it cheered me up first." He sat beside her. She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then folded it again. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to forgive them," she said. "And then I'm going to keep going." He nodded. "That sounds like peace." The next day, Elijah hosted a mini art show inside Haven House. Each resident displayed one piece. Some abstract, some literal, all brave. One painting stopped Riley cold. A portrait. Of her. Not her face. But her hands, one extended to lift someone up, the other holding a Bible, worn and well-used. And in the background, a cracked but glowing mirror. At the bottom, one word was written in white. Redeemed. Riley asked who painted it. Sophia raised her hand. I did. It's what I see when you walk into the room. Riley didn't answer. She just hugged the girl. Hard. Later, as the women danced and laughed and toasted sparkling cider, Riley stood beside Elijah on the porch again. You know, he said quietly, you never told me why you came here. What really broke you? She looked down, smiled faintly. Because I didn't know until recently. And now. She looked up at him, her voice steady. I wasn't broken because I walked away from my old life. I was broken because I spent years pretending I was whole. I let people love a version of me I didn't even like. He looked at her, deeply moved. And now, she said, I let people love me. Cracks, callings, questions, all of it. Because the real me is the one God made, not the one I kept trying to perform. He reached out and took her hand again. She didn't pull away, not because it was romance, but because it was safe. It was true. In her journal that night, she wrote, sometimes healing comes after the storm. Sometimes it comes through letters and late-night prayers. But often it comes through people who stay when they could have walked away. I was never too far gone, never too shattered, never too late. God doesn't need me perfect, just present. Chapter 12, the final chapter, becoming the story. The sun rose over Haven House with a golden softness that seemed to wrap every window in hope. It was Riley's 1-year anniversary since arriving, though she hadn't marked it on any calendar. Time had blurred, not in forgetfulness, but in presence. Every day had taught her something, stretched her, freed her. She woke early. No alarm, just peace. Pulled her sweater close, walked barefoot into the chapel, and sat, not to journal, not to pray, just to be. For the first time in years, Riley didn't feel the need to earn her peace. She was peace, because grace had taken root in her and grown. Later that morning, Brenda knocked on her door. Got a surprise for you, she said with a sly smile. Riley followed her outside and nearly lost her breath. Dozens of people stood in the Haven House yard. Former residents, kids, community leaders, even her parents, all smiling. A banner hung between the trees. Thank you, Riley, for choosing us. Elijah stood off to the side with a simple bouquet, wildflowers and lavender. Not flashy, just true. Brenda nudged her forward. Riley walked toward the crowd, tears already brimming. Ms. Rosa stepped up first, holding Riley's hand. Some people build shelters, she said. You built family. That's harder. Sophia followed next, holding the portrait she'd painted. You made me believe I was more than broken. One by one, they came forward. Stories, tears, laughter. Not a celebration of perfection, but of presence. Of love that stayed. Of faith that showed up. Riley's father approached slowly. No speech this time. Just an embrace. And 4 words she never knew she'd hear. I see you now. Elijah waited until the end. He stepped forward, eyes gentle, voice calm. You once said you didn't come here to stay, he said. But sometimes, the places we run to for healing become the ground where God plants us for purpose. He handed her the flowers. And sometimes, God doesn't write love stories in candlelight and confessions. Sometimes, he writes them in paint splatters and porch steps. He reached into his jacket and handed her a small envelope. She opened it. Inside was a deed to a small piece of land adjacent to Haven House. It's yours, he said, for whatever God builds next. She looked at him, stunned. A quiet pause passed. Then, finally, she asked, why would you give me this? Because the girl I first saw in pain became the woman I trust with purpose. And because wherever God is building something through you, I want to be near enough to help hold the walls up. That night, the chapel was full again. But it wasn't a service. It was a dedication. A new wing, Riley's vision. A space for women with children. A garden in the back. A small library filled with devotionals, poetry, and journals just like the one that had carried her through. As the sun dipped below the trees, Riley stood at the front and whispered, I didn't plan this life. I just said yes, one step at a time. She closed her journal that night for the last time. Not because the story was ending, but because she had become the story. A living testimony, not of perfection, but of redemption, of purpose, of a love that was written by God's own hand. Dear family, If you've ever felt like you've messed up too badly to start again. If you've been told you're too broken to lead, too behind to matter, or too small to carry purpose. Let Riley's story remind you. God doesn't need perfection. He simply asks for yes. Your past isn't your prison. Your detour isn't your disqualification. Your surrender is the soil where destiny grows. So take the next step. With fear, with faith, but most of all with hope. Because your ever after might just begin here. Like, comment, and subscribe if this story moved your heart. And remember, the greatest stories are not the ones we read, but the ones we live. Thank you.